Dear Jimmy, I think about him every day.
I think about him every day. And this was how many years after?
This would have been 50, 55, 60 years after the event.
And she still thought about him every day?
Yeah, it turned out that Lillian worked with Jim. They worked together probably for a couple of years. And Lillian shadowed Jim's job when he joined the RAF, and they kept in touch. Jim did his pilot training in America, and Lillian and Jim corresponded regularly up until, well, after he was killed. And I arranged to go and meet Lillian, and she had kept all Jim's letters. She very kindly lent them to me, so I was able to just at my leisure read through all his letters. There's nothing very much about the war. It's mostly about their friends, close circle of friends, what was going on at work, and Jim trying to convince her that he was just rolling, I think he says, rolling serenely along.
As you're telling the story, you're visibly moved, you sound visibly moved, and you look visibly moved. I'm wondering whether that meeting with Lil almost was the first moment that you were brought right close to Jimmy. She was the real human link. Yeah,
and she'd got the photo that you've got in front of you there on her sideboard. Yeah, and they had obviously been very good friends.
Well, I shouldn't really ask this, but were they just good friends?
I think so. Yeah, I think Lillian was rather keen on another one of their group of friends, and unfortunately he was killed just after Arnhem, and Lillian never married. She visited or the Remembrance Service every year. She visited the Garden of Remembrance and put 2 crosses down, one for Jim and one for Alan.
It's a story of incredible loyalty and of incredible love as well, and to have kept all of those letters. Did she ever tell you why she kept them?
No, I think she referred to Jim as a great pal, and yeah, I think there was just a very close bond between probably the 3 of them, Jim, Alan and Lillian, and there was a circle of 7 friends, and another lady that turned up when I'd visited Lillian was a lady named Alma. She was in the circle of friends as well. But it just struck me that the nub of the group of friends were those 3. Really.
They were tight, weren't they?
Yeah,
they were thick as thieves, clearly. You read these letters.
Yep.
So now your little bit of curiosity is blossoming into basically the next 12 years of your life. How did the letters lead you on to the subsequent research? What did you learn?
Well, as I say, most of it was fairly day-to-day stuff, a bit of banter, 1 or 2 names for people from work. But the last letter that Jim wrote to Lillian was written about a week before he died. And would you like to read the last paragraph?
Sure. So you've just passed it over. You'll forgive me because it's in slightly old-fashioned writing, so if I get it wrong, but it says you can spend quite an interesting fortnight. What does that say? Does it say struggling?
I think it's visiting.
Or juggling. Quite an interesting fortnight. Something, I'll skip that word out. What to do with our next leave. We have tried visiting sick friends and getting lost. Select afternoon teas, refined dinner parties and high life lunches. Does life hold any more in store? Exactly.
Yeah, how can you can't leave it there. You've got to, that was the last thing he wrote to Lillian. So you can't just leave the story there.
You must forgive me because it's not my job to get moved, but I can't deny that reading that last sentence, bearing in mind it was the last letter he wrote, I mean, the bitter irony doesn't even need to be highlighted.
No.
His last words in writing were, "Does life hold any more in store?"
Unfortunately, they didn't, and that's moving. But there was another letter that turned up that Lillian had written to Jim about a month later, chiding him for not being in touch, and it was returned from his squadron, and she didn't receive it until I think the end of May, and that was the first indication she had that Jim had been killed.
And you wonder, with the complicity and closeness that they had, whether when she wrote that letter a month later, chiding him gently, you wonder whether part of her
I think she probably
knew
yeah.
what was coming back.
Yeah.
John Proctor is with me. He's written a book called Does Life Hold Any More in Store? As we've just discovered, the title of that came from the very last line of the very last letter that his second cousin Jimmy wrote to his pen pal and friend Lil, and it has led to 12 years of research, which has led to this book, Does Life Hold Any More in Store? We'll be coming back with family in this hour with John Proctor and his second cousin Jimmy. He didn't know he existed until a logbook was discovered. So just to bring it bang up to date, you discovered the logbook, you discovered he existed, that he'd been a pilot in the Second World War, you discovered that he had a friend called Lil who'd kept all of the letters that he'd written to her, and in the last letter he wrote, he said, "Does life hold any more in store?" So your curiosity then led to a labour of love, and you had to research this man's life. What's happened in the intervening 12 years?
Well, the first breakthrough was I found out there was a survivor from the aircraft when it was shot down, and by luck there was an account by him in a book that my brother gave me, and I was able to contact Bob Fenton in New Zealand. Unfortunately, he was ill at the time, but he wrote back to me very kindly, sent me photos of the crew, and told me, unfortunately, he couldn't tell me very much about Jimmy because he'd only been with the crew 6 weeks, or Jim had only been their pilot for 6 weeks. So it snowballed from there. I've sent numerous letters off mainly to the names in the logbook. Another triumph was I tracked down Jim's original bomb aimer, who's a fantastic gentleman he lives up in the northwest, Jeff Yates. He's been able to tell me a lot about their times. Jim had a bit of a stumble. Their crew was split up after 4 operations. Managed to contact 1 or 2 more of the families of that original crew, and it's just gone on from there. Really, I've just been trying to sort of pin down where Jim was, who he knew, and trying to get first-hand anecdotes, really.
What was driving you on to do this? Because it's an incredible body of research. The book itself is 450-odd pages long. How do you keep the motivation?
I think, for me, if I see a name, I'd like to know what they look like. Or if I see a photo, I want to know who they are, and just build up little pen portraits of them, which is why there are about 600 names, which I've got on the companion website.
Yeah, so your website is jcproctor.co.uk, and you want to find people that knew the people you've unearthed, don't you?
Yeah, any names on the website. There are various lists from school, RAF, work, any names that are familiar to anybody and fit in with the postings and sort of general timings. If they think they know who anybody is, I'd love them to either send me a photo or get in touch.
What was the family you mentioned right at the start of the show who were based in and around Dunstable? Or
Right, there was one on the grammar school memorial board. I think the family came from Shillington. His name was Payne. I've got his Albert Payne. He was in the RAF and he was killed. Possibly a guy named Charles Hill, who'd got his service number, suggested that he joined up at Cardington. And a lady that doesn't appear in the book, Irene with the surname S, who lived in Water Eaton Road in Bletchley. I think she was a friend of one of the air gunners, one of the Canadian air gunners. But it's anybody that recognises a name.
08459 455 555 is the number to call if you think you recognise any of those, and we'd very happily put you in touch with John. So here we are, John, with this book that you've published, Does Life Hold Any More? What's been in it for you? What have you got out of all this research?
I've had some triumphant moments when the letters arrived from somebody you've been looking for. When Bob Fenton's letter arrived, it was a very emotional moment to see that on the doormat. It's made me do things, contact people that I wouldn't normally be able to approach. I think I'm a little bit more confident generally through it. I'll talk to anybody about it, really.
You must have learned that if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about your relationship with Jimmy, who you never knew?
I think he's a bit of a hero. I think when you're a kid, you look for stories about heroic figures, don't you? A bit of courage and what have you. And I think there's, in the back of my mind, I wonder what courageous acts might have happened in the last seconds when they were being shot down. I'm sure the flight engineer, had anybody else survived from the crew other than Bob Fenton, who got out first, would have described Dennis Corns' actions as being, very gallant, in that he was still alive. Obviously, he called to the crew to get out, and I think he went back to try and help Jim to pull the plane out of its dive. Where
can we get hold of the book, John?
The book is available through the website mainly. This is my first port of call, so it's not being marketed generally at the moment. I'm hoping to get it into various museums, historical bookshops and what have you. So.
And your website is www.jcproctor.co.uk. Having read the book, it's a marvellous historical document, and also a very personal document of a family member that you never knew, who you yourself call a hero. And John, I have to say, meeting people like you makes this job very worthwhile. It's been a real honour to meet you, to meet Jimmy as well. Jimmy's logbook, Jimmy's photos, Jimmy's letters as well. I feel like he's been with us as well for the last hour. But thank
you very much, Nick. It's been nice to meet you.
It's been a pleasure to have you in the studio. That's John Proctor on Twitter. His Twitter name is Proctor Book, and he asked me specially, could I thank Brian, who's been a huge help in setting up his website, and he forgot to mention it himself. So on behalf of John, thank you to Brian for all the work you've done for him as well.